An airline tried to delay a flight, but they didn't know a fallen soldier was on board. What happened next forced an entire airport to stand in silence and exposed a mistake they would never forget. The airport was loud, rushed, and careless, a place where announcements echoed nonstop. Wheels of suitcases rattled across the floor, and people hurried past without looking at one another. Flights were late, tempers were short, and no one had time to slow down. Until one quiet moment froze everything. Near the boarding gate stood a man who didn't belong to the chaos around him. He was still, composed, wearing a neatly pressed military uniform that carried years of service in every crease. In his hands, held close to his chest, was a folded American flag. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone. He simply stood there, eyes forward, calm on the outside, heavy on the inside. Most passengers walked past him without realizing what he represented. What they couldn't see was below their feet. Inside the cargo hold of the aircraft, waiting at the gate, rested a fallen soldier. A casket wrapped in honor, silence, and sacrifice. A warrior who would never walk through an airport again. A brother in arms returning home for the final time. The man at the gate wasn't just traveling. He wasn't going on vacation. He wasn't visiting family. He wasn't late for a meeting. He was an escort, hand-selected by the military for one of its most sacred responsibilities, to accompany the body of a soldier who had given everything for his country. His job was simple, yet sacred. Stay with the fallen, protect their dignity, and ensure they were never treated as cargo. But not everyone understood that. Behind the counter, the airline agent glanced at her screen, then at the man's uniform, then at the time ticking away. She didn't see duty. She didn't see sacrifice. She saw a delay. "Sir, you can't board like this," she said sharply, her voice edged with impatience. "You're holding up the flight." The words hung in the air, cold and careless. The escort slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers. There was no anger in his expression, no panic, just quiet resolve, the kind forged in places where lives are measured in seconds. In that moment, without realizing it, the airline crossed a line drawn by honor, sacrifice, and respect, and the mistake they had just made was about to change everything. His name was Captain Daniel Reeves. 20 years in uniform had shaped the way he stood, the way he spoke, and the way he carried silence. He had served in deserts and mountains, in places where the air smelled of dust and danger. He had led men into battle and brought some of them home. Others he had not. Too many funerals, too many folded flags handed to grieving families. Each one carved a mark into his memory. This mission was different. This mission was personal. The fallen soldier resting in the cargo hold was Sergeant Alex Moreno, a man Daniel had served beside, trained with, and trusted with his life. During his final deployment, Alex had saved multiple lives, pulling wounded soldiers from the blast zone under heavy fire. He never made it out himself. An explosion overseas ended his story in an instant. When the request came for an escort, Daniel didn't think twice. Escorting a fallen soldier wasn't just an assignment. It was a sacred duty, one of the highest honors the military could give. The escort was responsible for the fallen from the moment they left the battlefield until they were placed in the hands of their family. No distractions, no detours, no excuses. The rules were clear. The escort must stay with the fallen soldier at all times. No shortcuts, no delays, no exceptions. But airports don't operate on honor. They operate on schedules, boarding times, and profit margins. As Daniel stood at the gate, the airline supervisor stepped in, her tone calm but firm, practiced from years of handling problems. She glanced at the uniform, then at the clock. "Sir, your uniform isn't the issue," she said carefully. "The issue is that your situation is causing complications." Complications. That single word echoed in Daniel's mind. That's what they called a hero who had given his life. A soldier who would never laugh again, never see his family again, reduced to a delay on a screen. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't lose control. He calmly explained his orders. He explained military protocol. He explained, step by step, that the escort and the fallen soldier were inseparable, that the aircraft could not depart without him on board. The supervisor let out a tired sigh. "We'll have to offload the remains and rebook," she said casually, as if discussing luggage. That was the moment Daniel's jaw tightened. His posture stiffened. His voice dropped, steady and unshaken. "No," he replied. "You won't." The argument grew louder, cutting through the usual noise of the terminal. What had started as a quiet disagreement was now impossible to ignore. Conversations around the gate stopped mid-sentence. Rolling suitcases slowed. Heads turned. Passengers nearby began to notice. Phones came out. Whispers spread. "Why is that soldier upset? Did they really say that? Who's in the cargo hold?" No one had the full story, but everyone could feel the tension. Daniel stood his ground. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He stood tall, shoulders squared, like he had 100 times before in far more dangerous places. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "That soldier gave his life," he said firmly. "He will not be treated like lost luggage." The words landed hard. A few passengers lowered their phones. Others looked uncomfortable, suddenly realizing this wasn't about a delayed flight. It was about respect. Then came the call no one expected. Security was called. Yes, security. The irony was painful. A man who had worn his country's uniform for 20 years, who had stood between danger and innocent lives, was now being treated like a threat for asking for dignity. 2 security officers approached. One of them glanced at Daniel's uniform, then at the folded flag in his hands. His steps slowed. His expression changed. He leaned in and lowered his voice. "Sir," the officer asked quietly, almost respectfully, "is this a fallen escort?" Daniel met his eyes and nodded once. The officer swallowed hard. Without another word, he stepped back. He didn't reach for handcuffs. He didn't raise his voice. He simply moved aside, understanding the gravity of the moment. But the airline supervisor wasn't finished. Her tone sharpened, frustration spilling over. "If you refuse to comply," she warned, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you won't be allowed on this flight." The terminal went still. All eyes returned to Daniel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He looked straight at her and spoke with quiet certainty. "Then this plane isn't flying." The words weren't a threat. They were a statement of fact. In that instant, the power in the room shifted. This was no longer about policy or schedules. It was about something far bigger. And that was the moment everything changed. The captain of the aircraft arrived at the gate, his expression tight with confusion. Delays were common, but this one felt different. The terminal was unusually quiet. Passengers weren't arguing or pacing. They were watching. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't assume. He let everyone speak. Then he asked a single question, calm, direct, and heavy with meaning. "Is there a fallen service member on board?" "Yes," Daniel replied without hesitation. The captain's face changed instantly. Without a word, he removed his hat and held it against his chest. That simple gesture carried more weight than any announcement. In that moment, the terminal seemed to exhale. The noise disappeared. The terminal went silent. One by one, passengers stood up, not because they were told to, but because it felt right. Business travelers, families, teenagers with headphones around their necks. Every person rose to their feet, united by respect. The captain turned slowly toward the airline staff. "This flight does not move," he said firmly, his voice steady, "until this escort boards with full honors." There was no anger in his tone, no debate, no room for argument. The supervisor's face drained of color. The reality of the situation finally hit her. Apologies followed, quiet ones, rushed ones, embarrassed ones. Words tumbled out too late to erase what had already happened. The boarding announcement changed. No explanation was needed. Passengers stepped aside as Daniel approached the jet bridge. No one spoke. No one filmed. He walked alone, the folded flag still pressed to his chest. His shoulders were squared, his eyes fixed forward. Every step echoed with purpose. Inside the aircraft, the mood was unlike anything the crew had experienced before. The captain took the intercom, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are honored today to carry a hero home. Please observe a moment of silence. No one complained. No one shifted impatiently. No one checked their phone. Heads bowed. Eyes closed. Even the airline staff stood frozen, finally understanding the weight of what they had almost reduced to a schedule issue. For 60 seconds, time stopped, and in that silence, respect was restored. When the plane finally touched down, there was no rush to stand, no scramble for overhead bags. The usual impatience of landing was gone. Everyone stayed seated, waiting. On the tarmac below, the ground crew moved with unusual care. The cargo doors were opened first. Not for suitcases, not for freight, for honor. Captain Daniel Reeves stood at attention near the open doorway, his posture firm, his eyes fixed forward. Every movement below was slow and deliberate as the flag-draped casket was carefully lifted from the cargo hold. The red, white, and blue fabric rested perfectly still, covering a sacrifice that words could never fully explain. There were no commands shouted, no chaos, only precision, respect, and silence. Passengers pressed their faces gently to the windows. Some placed their hands over their hearts. Others wiped away tears they hadn't expected to shed that morning. Strangers shared the same quiet emotion, connected by a moment none of them would forget. What began as a delay quickly became something much larger. Videos from the terminal and the aircraft spread across the internet within hours. Millions watched the clip of passengers standing, of the captain removing his hat, of a lone escort carrying a folded flag. Comments poured in, messages of gratitude, anger, and reflection. The airline issued a public apology the next day. They admitted their mistake. Policies were reviewed. Staff were retrained. Names involved were not forgotten. But the real lesson wasn't written in a statement or buried in corporate language. It was written in silence, in bowed heads, in standing still. It was written in the understanding that some duties are greater than schedules, and some moments demand more than policy manuals. Captain Daniel Reeves never asked for recognition. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post online. He didn't seek praise. He simply did his duty, the same way he had for 20 years. And the airline learned, the hard way, that when respect is denied to the fallen, the living will speak. Because some mistakes aren't just errors. They are moments that reveal who we truly are, and who we choose to be when it matters most. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video to honor the sacrifice. Subscribe for more powerful stories that matter. Share this with someone who believes respect should never be delayed. Because some stories aren't just meant to be watched. They're meant to be remembered.